Welcome to the Reverberations podcast, where we explore the human experience and the journey of self-discovery. What's good, everyone? Thank you for joining us for another episode of Reverberations. As always, it's an honor to share this time and space with you. And today it is my privilege to have Craig Strang-Thompson with us as a special guest. It's been over 20 years that our friendship has evolved. And what's most intriguing about this, which I'm sure is going to come up in our conversation today, is here we are 20 years later together and recognizing the patterns, recognizing the similarities, recognizing the synchronistic encounters that we have experienced, not only over the past 20 years, but prior to that. And a lot of the same thread that has been woven through the tapestry of our lives that has revealed so many experiences that we've been able to reflect on, been able to grow through. And I'm really, really excited to have Craig as a guest today because there's a lot of medicine that can be offered, that can be revealed through the power of story, through the power of connection. So Craig, thank you so much for being here with me today. Just share with us a little bit about yourself, your journey, what you're of service to, and kind of where you are now.
Well, thanks, John, for having me here today. I'm humbled and grateful to have the opportunity to hang out with you. Your listeners may not know it, but I've been hanging out at the Stuart base camp for the last week on my own quest and journey. Somewhat late in life, and maybe we'll get into that in a little bit. But my this journey is both a geographic and spiritual journey for me, and I've learned things about myself and how it relates to others in somewhat inexplicable, surprising, and remarkable ways this week. So. You know a lot of that story, so yeah, I'll let you decide how these twists and turns of this conversation will go. I mean, because I've laid it on you, man. I've given you a lot, and I've kind of blown your mind this week on more than one occasion. So I'll leave that to you as the navigator.
Yeah. Well, I think a great place to start is, as Craig was sharing, we're here in my base camp, right? We're here in Wisconsin. So I think a beautiful place to really begin is share the why. What has been the journey that has led you to being here now, other than, obviously sharing time and space together?
Well, I mean, the immediate answer to that question, I don't want to reveal just yet. Yeah. Because it goes back decades. Yeah. For me. And the events that led up to making this appearance here in the Wisconsin region go back literally 30 years, 35 years to be specific, almost to the day, and literally to the day. And so my own travels and my own journey throughout that time has been one of, I've often compared it to a jigsaw puzzle and putting these pieces to the puzzle of my own life. And it's not exactly an ingenious thought. We all do that, right? We all have these puzzle pieces, and we're constantly trying to arrange them on the table and make sense of, how we perceive our lives and how we fit into the world, and that's something that I personally struggled with for many, many years. I've learned through some really committed therapy sessions over the last year and a half. I've learned a ton about myself. And one of the biggest things that I discovered somewhat unwittingly is that I had created a I don't know. I've created a life where I was living in a space of fear. So a lot of my decisions were fear based, and fear of many, many things. So I created an environment where everything that I did was founded in my fear of something, and my decisions were based on the fear of the outcome of something. And so if we fast forward to today, when I'm sitting with you today, I'm happy to say that I'm able to reflect on that very objectively. And I know that I am now better equipped to master that fear. I'm able to cage that monster, what I like to call my own personal Frankenstein. I built that monster. I stitched it together and I let it, free on the streets, with, the villagers with torches, no pun intended, right? So, but literally I built that monster, and it was up to me to kind of, tamper it,
Right.
chain it down and be the master of my monster. And so what brought me here is this 30-year culmination of the ultimate discovery in my life. What I discovered in the summer 2020 was something that I had waited decades for. And it was a call that I had waited all my adult life for. And it was the call from my biological son. And getting a little choked up saying this. It wasn't a surprise that I had a biological son. It was the surprise that it truly was my son. And, what unfolded after that call and after that discovery and after that somewhat ice-breaking moment was the truth.
Yeah.
And in all its glory and all its pain and pleasure and, and all the magic and, all of the various elements that come with it. And it's still very young, and it's still very, a relationship that is so much in its infancy with an adult child. He's not a child. He's a grown man with a child. And so, and with that, I'm learning that it is yet another opportunity and another instance in my life where I have to open myself up and reveal myself in ways to this new addition to my life that I have struggled most of my adult life to open up and share. And I'm realizing as I use this sort of analogy, I'm the master of analogies, I'm realizing, is this somewhat revolving door of kind of coming out and coming out of, and revealing myself to people, revealing parts of myself that were, hidden or held close to the vest in shame or in that fear of rejection or fear of not being accepted, fear of failure, all of these conditioned responses that I fabricated.
Right.
But now I have a whole new sense of purpose because I have a lineage to which I can credit doing my best work to.
Yeah.
I have somebody that I feel I have a lot of accountability towards, not to disrespect anybody else in my life. I mean, I have the love of my life for 23 years, and he and I are, incredibly blessed to have each other, and I have a daily, hourly, by minute accountability and love for him. But this takes on a different flavor. It's like a different spice out of the rack, that I'm working with.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing all that, because, it was like the conversation that we had last night talking about mind-blowing, right? The continuous coming out, the continuous revealing ourselves. And there was one thing that you had mentioned a couple of times in our conversation, which has been incredibly powerful, which is this peeling back of the layers, in the journey of self-discovery. And I loved how you began, like, I don't want to necessarily reveal and start off this conversation with what's happened now, because it really began, I mean, if we really go back to it, in everything that we shared. It began the day that we were born. It began before we were even born. The generational experiencing, and you even tied that into it with what you just shared, is now there's this personal accountability and responsibility to something that's beyond just me, beyond our intimate relationships that we have, beyond our job, beyond our purpose of doing. We now have this lineage, right? You have now a 35-year-old son, adult man, with a son. So there's a generational responsibility that's carrying forward. And what a powerful opportunity that is. Like, you were speaking to that, the monster, right? That monster that you created. And now it's almost like it's in that deconstruction, deconstructing that, peeling back those layers and like witnessing all these versions of ourselves. So it's like, there's this part of me. Oh, wow. There's this part of me. Oh, wow. This part of me created this. And this is where I'm at now. And now I get to utilize this life experience at this point in time. I would love if you shared with us a little bit of that journey of self-discovery, because it is so powerful. That constant, the thing that you just shared, I think is such a powerful message for anyone, is that revolving door of continuously coming out, because essentially what that is just sharing our truth.
Yeah.
Our personal truth. So there's a personal liberation. There's a freedom that is there. It's like Bob Marley, break free from the mental slavery.
Yeah. I mean, the truth is that there is this layering in my life that I have chosen not to peel back for most of my adult life. From my youngest years and my adolescence and my childhood through, my teen years and into young adulthood. And I held everything very close. And again, I think a lot of that was based on these, fears of, the rejection that comes with being different. And so I was able to hold those layers down. I was able to literally shellac them down and keep them from coming away and from being discovered, and creating this doppelganger version of myself that was acceptable to the world. And I think I told you last night that I have this somewhat affinity for social media, because I feel like it doesn't represent often our truest selves. And I see it not just in myself, but I see it in, the world around me. And I feel like I was the architect of my own social media platform long before it ever existed online. And I had created this artificial, veneer that I presented to the world. And meanwhile, the truth within, I held very, very closely, and painfully so. And maybe I'll always do that. I hope that I can be free of the need to hide from the world. But I feel like there will always be parts of that require me to do it out of survival, out of the need to survive, and out of the need to safely navigate an otherwise somewhat extraordinarily difficult, difficult world that we live in. It's increasingly difficult. But, for me, it starts with my, like all of us. I mean, if I were to speak in a linear fashion to you, it began in my own childhood for me, where, I knew from an extremely young age that I was different from the rest. I knew that. And yet I had no one to discuss it with. I had no one to share it with. I had no role models. And so it became, I'm quoting a phrase from Dexter when I say, Dexter from Showtime, by the way, my dark passenger, because it became my dark passenger. It was the thing that only I knew, that I held and I kept from the world. And what I instead manufactured and presented and created and presented to the world was a version of myself that was more easily and more readily accepted. And that is the trajectory that I took, for many, many decades of my life. And throughout that same journey, I had to find ways of reversing course and deviating from that so that I could find a sense of my own salvation and freedom from that, because it was a lot of work, is a lot of work. It takes an incredible amount of effort and work to be something other than your truest self.
That is incredibly powerful statement. It's one thing that I believe is that being the living evidence of our truth does require work. It's why, ignorance is bliss for a lot of people, and, what you just shared is incredibly powerful because, reverse engineering the programming that society, societal expectations, or not only that, within family, within work, within any sort of construct that we have created, there's these expectations of how to be, and deconstructing the how and allowing ourselves to drop into our most vulnerable level of authenticity. And one thing that I wanted to tap into, because it's rejecting ourself, essentially, rejecting our personal truth. There's something that I think that's an important topic to discuss, because what I see in society is, especially amongst men, is that there is this disconnect of tuning in with our emotions, of disconnect of tuning in with our personal truth or traumatic experiences, or sharing our life experience with others. And when you were talking about, about what's being hidden, right? Your dark passenger. One thing that I tune in with often is what's necessary to come forward. What needs to be given the voice, right? I mean, a personal belief of mine is that there's, the power of story, and that everybody has medicine for somebody else. And you never know what someone is going to share that's going to either trigger a memory or bring something up within that may provide a platform for them to be able to feel into and have a moment of healing for themselves. So in those spaces in between of what's being shared and what's being held back, what do you believe is important? One of the things that you shared yesterday is giving that silence a voice, giving the internal dialogue a voice out loud.
I mean, yeah, there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
But what I'll say is that being able to navigate in society as a gay man is something even to this day that is not easy. Although I feel like my generation made it a hell of a lot easier for those that followed. So, and I willingly and gleefully welcome, the acceptance that now comes from it. But it's not without its faults. And, I'm a Generation Xer. I'm not from the baby boomer generation. I'm on the cusp of it. Yeah. I was raised in a time where these things just weren't talked about, and it was an A or B proposition when I was being raised in the 60s and 70s, and and frankly, B wasn't always the better option,
Right.
So there was a very somewhat limited ability to express yourself. And so because of that, and because I recognized that as a young boy, again, I held it back, I held it to myself, I kept it to myself, and I realized at a very young age I adapted in ways where I was able to continue to function in that modern society at the time. And still, it was very, very awkward. And I think even as a child, in spite of my efforts to hide it, others saw in me what I didn't really know or understand completely in myself. And because of that, I did suffer a lot of persecution and bullying. Bullying doesn't seem to be a very unique trait. It doesn't seem to be a very unique experience, sadly.
Right.
Many young people get bullied. And so even though the numbers are usually far in favor of the victims than the bullies themselves, the bullies seem to have all the power. And so that bullying mentality followed me throughout my childhood and into my adult life until I found ways to empower myself and tell myself that those things really don't matter. That has taken me a lifetime to be able to assure my own self that what others think does not matter. And that has been a lifelong endeavor to not care about what others think of me. And yet, I think it's an impossible equation to do that, because I think we all want to be accepted. We all want to be loved. We all want to be adored and revered and remembered, and not judged or chastised or, looked down upon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that, because it goes into, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, a sense of belonging, and what if I don't belong? What if I am judged? What if I am not approved of? And it kind of goes back to that fear that you were talking about, the fear of being different, the fear of rejection. So what are some of the, you talked about when you were being bullied, of shifting from being bullied into your, early adult life, and leaning into that empowerment. What are some of the experiences and practices that allowed you to empower yourself in those instances?
That started at a really young age for me. I was raised by a single mother until I was 7 or 8 years old. And my mother, like many single moms in that, particular time, worked several jobs under the table, taking public assistance, anything she could do to keep the lights on and keep our bellies full. And so in her own quest for some salvation and some sense of security, she seemed to always find the wrong men in her life. And I'm afraid that there was a model there that I was witnessing. And, now that I look back on it, I can look back on it in retrospect and see that, my mother had some really terrible choices for mates in her life. She finally married one, and when I was around the age of 7 or 8, who was an alcoholic and a womanizer and an abuser of an epic scale. And so what ensued was a time for us where she found the security of somebody who would, care for her and take the perceived burden off of her in raising a family. And yet she also assimilated the additional burden of being an abused woman. And it was a nightly affair. So, I was a child who literally hid in my room every night and stayed awake most of the evening, witnessing and listening to my mother being psychologically and physically abused. And so what began to happen was a cycle of experiencing that each night, and then venturing out the next morning to go to school, to get on a bus, to face more persecution and more judgment and more physical abuse on a school bus that led me to a school where I was not accepted. And so I found myself in all of these different places in my young life where I didn't feel accepted or safe anywhere. And I suffered that. I endured that for years. And so around the age of 10, I came of age at a young age at 10, and so I began to defend my mother. So there would be moments where I would have I just had my limit on any given evening, and I would stand up to my stepfather, who never laid a hand on me. He always laid a hand on my mother and did violent and horrible things to her, but he never laid a hand on me. But the psychological abuse that I experienced was palpable. So when I began to defend her, he would instead just kick me out.
Yeah.
And so I would end up on the street. And, at first it was, I would get kicked out. I would, go to a friend's house or, hot bunk on somebody's sofa or something for the night and come back home. And over time, it began to be 2 days away, 3 days away, 4 days away. And then the cycle began where he would kick me out and my mother would call the police to have me returned.
Yeah.
And, and oddly, the police never saw what was happening. So I was always portrayed as the problem, the juvenile delinquent, when in fact, my mother had makeup over her bruises and, had completely polished down the house from any signs of violence the night before. And my mother was a magician at that, so the house could be destroyed from breaking furniture and throwing Christmas trees out the window, and just horrible things. And then the morning, she was a magician at making it all disappear and making it look like everything was perfect. A bit of a Stepford wife sort of mentality. And then, around the age of 11, I just decided I'd had enough. I'd been kicked out and returned and kicked out and returned and threatened with juvenile detention for something I wasn't even responsible for. And I finally told my mother that I'm leaving. And I told her, you can come with me. I will take care of you.
Yeah. At 11.
At 11.
Yeah.
And she chose to stay with her abuser. And I already had my bags packed. I was already ready to be kicked out again. And I did get kicked out again. And then I disappeared. I went underground.
So at that moment, you're 11 years old, right? You say to your mom, I've had enough, basically. I've had enough. I can't take this anymore. I mean, for listeners out there, imagine yourself being 11 years old and experiencing this. And then saying to your parental unit, I'll give you the opportunity to come with me at 11 years old. So feel into that for a moment. Craig, at 11 years old, when you say that to your mom from your heart, what did that feel like at that moment?
It hurt. It hurt, and yet I knew that's what she would choose.
Yeah.
So, and I felt like she'd made her choice, and there was no persuading her. And I understood, even at that young age, that she was in a diseased state. My mother was also an alcoholic, by the way, so if I haven't mentioned it, that alcohol was a big component of this whole period of time. And there was not only just the nightly abuse, but this nightly consumption of a case of beer that would begin, after work. When the dinner bell rang, the beer began to pour, and there would be a case of beer consumed,
like satiating the abuse
or fueling it.
Yeah.
And so I just knew that she was an alcoholic, and that was a big component of it. And so, I felt like I had to do what was best for me.
Yeah.
And that if I didn't do it, that I may not survive it. And mind you, I will say that my older brother had already escaped that same cycle before me.
And how old was he when he escaped it?
He was 3 years older than me.
Okay.
So he escaped it, moved in with an aunt across town, finished high school, and and so he had also escaped it in his own way, but he did it in a more somewhat atypical way, where he moved in with a family member. I just went to the streets.
Just said, I'm out. Yeah, I'm done.
Yeah, I'm out. I'm done. And what ensued was about a 6-year period where I barely spoke to her.
Yeah.
Because I felt like she had made her choice, and it hurt me in ways that I wasn't even evolved enough or mature enough to really understand. How could you make that kind of choice?
Right.
But she just wanted somebody to take care of her.
Yeah.
And she was willing to let a monster take care of her. and she was okay with that. She just never felt like she deserved better.
Right.
And I take that as one of my lessons that I've carried through my entire life, was knowing that I deserve more, and I have learned from that unfortunate experience with her to always expect more and know that I deserve more, even when I secretly maybe didn't. I shouldn't say secretly, but even though I still felt unworthy,
Right. Right.
for other reasons and other emotional reasons. Yeah.
So that baseline was there, that baseline model of self-preservation, of knowing that there's something better than this.
Yeah, I didn't know what it was.
Right.
And it was a coal miner town in southwestern Pennsylvania. And, there was no future. There was no hope. And, I lived off the kindness of strangers, and some people were stranger than others, and some were even dangerous. I ended up in some situations where people would take me in for a couple nights, let me sleep on their sofa, and then I would sort of move on. I became somewhat of a very young drifter in my quest to find some stability. At one point, I was living with 3 drug dealers and consuming, incredible, amounts of drugs at a really young age. I mean, and none of those things were healthy for me. I also recognized that.
Yeah.
Even then, I recognized this is not where I should be, but this is where I am. And it was a bit of an escape too. So I was, there may have been a bit of a rebel in me going, I'm free. And, I escaped into, a lot of what maybe, I don't know if any drugs are harmless, but it was pot and hash and some speed. I sound like I'm justifying it, but there were no needles. Let's put it that way.
Right.
I mean,
we weren't doing crack cocaine.
We weren't doing crack, but my worst sins were doing LSD. Before the age of 18, and that's a whole other chapter.
Right.
But I survived that, and ultimately, if it weren't for the grace of God, I survived that. And there were times when family members bailed me out. I had cousins come and bail me out. I had aunts and uncles come and bail me out. My brother. There were often times where people would helicopter in and try and lift me up. But ultimately, I was still left on my own. And around the age of 15, I was taken in by a woman who was a single mom, and she had a place not far from my mother in the same town. But I was literally on the street. It was the middle of winter. I had nowhere to go. She said, "You can stay on the sofa," and that led to me living with her for a couple of years, actually. And she became a friend and a confidant, and she was very much a broken bird herself. Mm-hmm. She had a lot of her own sins and her own failures and so forth, but she had a huge heart. Mm-hmm. and she opened up her home. She was that person who opened up her home to strays of all shapes and sizes. There were even stray dogs would come and hang out at her place. They wouldn't hang out at their home with their owners, or they were even neighborhood dogs. Even neighborhood dogs would leave their homes and come to hang out at her house. It was an interesting dynamic. Yeah. But I spent the greater part of 2 years there. Wow. And I was working. I wasn't going to school. Mind you, in this entire arc of time, from the age of 11 to 17, I was not going to school. I was out of the system, working at a Holiday Inn, making tip income, paying rent. I was living a somewhat adult life. Yeah. But it wasn't, I knew even then that this is not where I need to be. This is not it. This is just a step in some direction. I wasn't sure what, and I wasn't sure how, and I didn't have the ultimate influence. I didn't have the influences around me that I really needed and deserved. But I was willing to find them.
Yeah. So at any point, a 2-part question here. At any point, we've talked about the fear, right? The fear of rejection and a lot of the other fears that you were saying. Was there at any point that you feared for your life during this? Or were you so deeply in survival mode and still had that trajectory of, even though you, like you were saying, you didn't know where it was going to go, right? But still had a trajectory of like, I'm moving through this, I'm getting through this. But was there at any point, because I mean, I can imagine at 11, 12 years old of being on my own, not being in school, and kind of bouncing around, because my life kind of took on a very similar pathway. At 11 years old, I stood up to my stepfather too, and ended up taking on a lot of responsibilities that a 11-year-old now, if they had to take on those responsibilities, it would be like, what, you know and also being somewhat of a drifter, bouncing around from home to home to home.
Yeah, something we learned about each other.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
But was there at any point of during that period of time, especially, I mean, living with 3 drug dealers and, being on your own, not knowing, where things are going to go, was there at any time that you had a fear for your life, or was there always this deep sense of faith?
I think I had a somewhat youthful invincibility about me, so I didn't really understand. I didn't think that death was, in my radar.
Yeah.
I never felt like I was on the verge of death. However, this is going to be another bomb I'll drop on you that, we've had many discussions. But
Head blown.
there is a moment where, and this is, around the time I was like 16 or 17. What was before I moved in with this, this woman who kind of took me in, with a big heart. But prior to that, I had relocated with 2 of these individuals that were, in the drug scene, and moved even further away from my, my hometown. And, I thought I was getting a better life out of it, but it was just isolating me more. And I was young. I was like, at that time I was probably like 14, and, I didn't have a job. I was lost. I was depending on these 2 guys for some sort of sustainability and security. One of them had was much older than me, and I lived in his apartment with him, and by today's standards we would probably call this some sort of sexual exploitation, but in my young mind and at that time, this was the 70s, right? I had to do a little math there. I'm that old. I didn't see it that way. I felt like I was trying to make a life with somebody, whether it was misguided or not, but I was really being exploited. That kind of came to a head because I don't know why, but at the age of like 13 or 14, I had no job, no income, and I had a bank account. Yeah. I had a checking account. And those 2 individuals actually took those checks and wrote bad checks all over town.
Wow.
And I realized I had to get away. That was it. I had to get away. And so, no transportation, no way out. I have a big brother, cousin, uncle figure that always looked out for me. He came in and, helicoptered me out of there and basically brought me back into, our hometown area. And that's when I ended up moving into that more permanent living situation. But while I was in that living situation with her, which ended up being for about 2 years, shortly after I got there, those 2 gentlemen tracked me down, and I was home alone one night, and they came in, and it became a very violent situation where I did not think I was going to survive that night. Wow. And it took on a really bizarre twist because there was a level of haunting going on in that home already. Yeah. Like spiritual. Okay. There were spiritual haunting moments already going on in that home that we were contending with. And when these guys showed up and literally physically assaulted me, I ended up escaping and hiding in the basement of this coal miner townhome. And I literally felt the possession of a spirit standing in that hall, in that stairwell. It was another very.
Was it a protective moment, or was it
terrifying?
Terrifying. Okay.
It was absolutely terrifying. Like I went from one bad situation to another. And they disappeared. I don't know what happened. They just took off, tire screeching down the road. I guess they've got the satisfaction in knowing that,
they handled that.
They sufficiently, horrified me. Yeah. And then I ended up feeling this like odd spiritual possession. Mm-hmm. And, all of these things combined, were just more touchstones along the way telling me that this is not where I need to be. This is not where I'm going to end up.
So let's fast forward now. So you're going through all these experiences. You're now back in your hometown. You've got a semi-permanent space. You were just sharing before, like, you don't necessarily know where it's going, but you also know that this is not the path for you. So what was it? What series of events or what moment was it that elevated you out of this darkness, out of this seemingly path of like dead ends, if you will?
Yeah, well, greatly over the period of age 11 to 17, I really didn't speak to my mother, as I felt like we didn't have anything to discuss. I really had kind of drawn a line in the sand with her. However, I still yearned to have a relationship with my mom, and so there were moments where I would have a phone call with her. And I have memories of my older brother already graduating high school, joined the Navy, and her reflecting on that, going, look at your brother, look at what he's doing with his life, and trying to guide me in that direction. And I resisted that. At the age of 17, I received a subpoena from the local magistrate. I had to appear in court for being truant for years. And my mother was also subpoenaed. So I hadn't seen my mother face to face in years. And I saw her for the first time in court.
Wow. What was that like?
Sad.
Yeah.
It was sad.
Yeah.
Awkward. And my mother was weak and powerless and abused, and she was a shell of herself, and so she wasn't the kind of the figure of a mother that you would want to see. I was even at that age, I wanted more for her. Right. I stood in front of the judge, and the judge said, "Why haven't you been to school in so long?"
Yeah.
And I began to unfold and unpack this story I've already told you. I'm like, you try and go to school.
Yeah. Right.
When there's no safe space for you at home, on the bus, or at school. Yeah. And you try and go to school. And so I did what I had to do to protect myself. That's what I did. Mm-hmm. And of course, the judge wasn't very sympathetic, and my mother was not willing to sign me out of school. And by state law, I was forced to go back for 3 weeks until I turned 17. Mm. I took art class for 3 weeks, and on my 17th birthday, I signed myself out of school.
Wow. And then what ensued after that? So now that you have, you're out of school, you did what you had to do legally.
Yeah.
Right. So now you've completed this, but now there's still this pathway, this life that is before you. Now, what do you do with that once you had that education? What was your mindset at that time and moving forward?
The shame of it, John, is that I was a very bright student. When I was in the system, I was, my report cards are, A's and B's and good grades and, good feedback from the teachers and administrators. And I, had a very early development, introduction to music, at a very young age. I think I was like 5 or 6. I was playing the alto horn and went from the alto horn to the baritone, to the tuba, to the trumpet and the fife. And I excelled at those things. I just didn't have the infrastructure, and I didn't have the home life to support it. And so, when I ended up at the age of 17, free in some way, but with no direction, it was business as usual, really. So yeah. I still had no idea where I was going to land. So that was in like the spring of my 17th year. And my brother came, home on leave somewhere in the fall of that year. And prior to that, there was limited communication with my brother. He was a submariner, and the only way you could communicate with them was through like a telegram. And you were limited to a certain number of characters, and I still have a few of them in my
pre-Twitter.
Pre-Twitter. Yes, it was yes, exactly. It was like Flintstones Twitter. And you could say like 10 words or something, and they could and I don't even think they could reply back. It was a one-way thing. They would print it out and hand it to the sailor, and that was the end of it. But I knew he was coming home, and anyway, he came home, and he kind of plucked me out of my despair and said, "Let's just go down and talk to the recruiter." And I was ready to have that conversation, so I said, "Let's do it."
So you were open to it.
I was open to it, and he didn't have to cuff me or zip tie me and drag me down there. Because I saw in him, I saw a version of myself in him, that, we both we were cut from the same cloth.
Yeah.
And I saw that he had, in fact, been able to achieve that. And so I went down, took the tests. They gave me an offer to join. I later learned it wasn't the greatest offer, but it was a great alternative. It was a great offer to me.
Right.
Many people got bigger, better offers than me, but I got what I justly deserved, and I only had to get my GED. So I went down to Carnegie Mellon University, and I was a little cocky about it, but I didn't even study, and I passed it.
Yeah.
Again, I was a smart kid, so I passed it, and that was an achievement. And I went down to the recruiter and said, Here you go. And then they scheduled me. It happened very quickly from that point forward. So I think Christmas Day or the day after Christmas, I was on a plane to Orlando for boot camp.
Wow. And what year was that?
1982.
So 1982. So now you're in the Navy, and you have essentially, we'll say, for lack of better words, escaped this prior history.
Yeah.
Though now there's this whole other storyline that's now being populated in your reality.
Yeah, well, I knew where all the bones were buried.
Right.
All the skeletons were still in the closet.
Right.
They just kind of followed me.
Right.
Yeah.
So how was that going into the Navy, though? Going from seemingly no structure whatsoever, right? I mean...
Well, I really went in head first.
Yeah.
So I knew I had this incredible opportunity.
Yeah.
That I could not squander. And I also understood, I clearly understood when I made that oath, you remember the oath?
Yeah.
That that time in my life was not going to be about me, that this was in service to my country. And I went in head first with that.
Yeah.
Over time, I developed a sense of self that began to sort of cut away at this devotion to country. Mm-hmm. I was always devoted to my service and devoted to my country, and don't get me wrong, I don't want to minimize that, but I had to learn to make some room for myself.
Yeah.
And my own place in this world. And let's not forget, I was a young man. I was kind of underdeveloped, you know, socially, sexually, physically. I was 117 pounds when I went in the Navy. I mean, I was just this twig, you know, but I was also a blank slate.
Right.
And impressionable, yes. But I took it all in. I took every opportunity that came my way. And I was never unaware of the opportunity that had been given to me, and I wasn't about to squander it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So now that we're in the Navy, and I want to bridge the gap between the Navy and the present, because the story of the Navy really has a lot to do with the story of the present. It doesn't really have a lot. It has everything to do with the story of the present. So if you could walk us through your experience in the Navy, going in a time of where it wasn't don't ask, don't tell, it was just don't, right? And going through that experience, and because what we were talking about over the past couple of days is so important, is the topic of sexuality really isn't discussed on the deeper levels, right? The importance of sexuality and the experiencing of that, and that constant coming out. And especially when you're within a system that doesn't support that, yet there's so much that is suppressed. There's so much that's swept under the rug. Then it went to don't ask, don't tell. There's nothing to see here. It's going on. Nothing to see here. And so was there further exploitation that was there that you experienced in a completely different container?
Well, let me just start by saying that when I went in the Navy, I didn't identify sexually as anything.
Okay.
I was too young. I was adolescent. I had experiences. I had influences, probably no different than any other young person, even today. Although as I have already attested to, that from a very young age, I had emotions and feelings and sensations that I knew were different. And I also I wasn't in a safe place. I did not have outlets to express them and discuss them, and I didn't have alternatives. Yeah. And so when I went in the Navy, I was really unidentifiable, with the assumption that I was heterosexual, and I assumed that too. Yeah. So I didn't know the word gay. That word wasn't in my vocabulary.
Right.
What happened over time and what ensued was I became a part of a culture, a very fraternal culture of sexual conquests. And so, I was surrounded by men, all my buddies and my shipmates and my classmates and my boot camp buddies and everybody, I was surrounded by men. And so I picked up a lot of my cues from the older, men around me. Mm-hmm. And I literally just, I found that the best way for me to survive was to just follow the crowd. Right. And do whatever else, what everyone else is doing.
Yeah, what's acceptable.
And what was acceptable, yeah. And what everyone else was doing was, maybe depraved, right. Maybe normal. But, there was a lot of hard work. Don't get me wrong. We were serving our country, So when the job was, over and the work day was done, then, there was a lot of casual sex and picking up girls. And so that's what I did. Yeah. And I thought that's what I had to do. I thought I had to do that. Even though internally, I thought, I'm not really enjoying this, but right. maybe I just need to practice.
Right.
Yeah. Had a lot of practice.
Yeah.
Never worked. So, meanwhile, in the midst of that, I'm still having these inner emotions, these inner feelings, these inner, physical manifestations that I couldn't reconcile either. It was against God. It was against country. It was against my family. It was against the law. These things were not part of a acceptable society. So it was just further suppressed and further pushed down. Something that I was already well accustomed to doing my entire life, only to a greater degree. So not only did I have all the societal, oppression and family oppression, now I had the government oppression on top of me, further enforcing that that's not appropriate behavior. That's not what you're supposed to do. And so the quest continued to conform.
Yeah. That quest for conformity is, it creates such an amount of pressure. It's like the creation, it can either destroy or create a diamond. It's either going to completely destroy a human being into becoming just a shell, a shell. Or it has the possibility in that compression of now tightly compacting everything together, and now there's this self-awareness of that I'm because of these life experiences, let me embody these life experiences and do something with them and begin to shine from within. And from the story that you've shared with me, it's been an evolutionary journey and a journey of self-discovery of recognizing these experiences over life and how to use those to be able to turn the corner and to be able to shine from within, accept the self, and begin on that journey of self-liberation and freedom. What were some of the experiences that began to accelerate that journey?
Well, I will say to you that, the self-discovery phase of my young adult life, regardless of my station and where I was. I don't think that that's unique. I think that, every young person
For sure.
has to find their way.
Yeah.
They have to experiment, and they have to ultimately come to a conclusion from them for themselves. Maybe what was unique for me was the fact that I was in an environment where that wasn't really part of the proposition.
Right.
So, I ended up in a lot of scenarios where I was attempting to have relationships with females, and it just never felt right to me. It just never really felt right to me. If I were to draw a line between that period of my life and today, that happy accident led me to have a 35-year-old son today, by the way.
Right.
So because of my attempt to conform, it brought forth a child, but I was not, unfortunately, able to be a part of that child's life, and I was denied that opportunity. But still, I'll take it.
Yeah.
And I'm now in present day taking that. But over time, there was also an undercurrent of experimentation that was going on that had nothing to do with women, and I realized through the course of this contract that I was in that this was not sustainable. I could not continue to do this. So I was torn between my commitment to country, the commitment to a contract, and the ultimate commitment to my own self-preservation and my own happiness. So, I realized that they didn't align, and I couldn't continue. I couldn't imagine staying in that program to retirement age, 20, 30 years, and being happy, being somebody I'm not, being a robot, for what? And so, and that was ultimately what led me to making the decision to fulfill my contract and get out. And I wanted to do it honorably. I'll tell you that when I was in, it was a period of pre-don't ask, don't tell. And it was, what I like to call the don't period. And, I have memories of conspiring with my shipmates on how to get out honorably, because there were days where it was just misery. You're at sea, and there's nothing to do, or they're working you like a dog, and we did crazy things to entertain ourselves. And sometimes we would play shots with NyQuil at sea, and crazy, right?
Yeah.
And smoking cigarettes and talking about how we could get out of the Navy honorably.
Yeah.
And there were no good ways to do it. There really weren't. The military has done a brilliant job of creating a system that keeps you there for good reason, to protect our country, and I highly encourage any young person to do it. But I witnessed firsthand those that raised their hand and said, "I am not heterosexual," and they were literally extracted like a prisoner from that command. One, in fact, was literally taken by a helicopter from the middle of the Atlantic Ocean.
Wow.
In an instant. For being gay.
And that wasn't too long ago.
It was 1984.
Yeah.
85.
So less than 30 years ago.
Yeah. So, I knew I wasn't going to be helicoptered out of there for admitting something that I wasn't even sure about, by the way. I was still very unsure, in spite of my instincts, in spite of that instinctual, feeling that I was having. And so, honor was really more important than my own personal well-being or my own personal happiness at the time. So I made that decision ultimately to just finish out my contract and get out. And that's exactly what I did. But even after I got out, I still spent the greater part of a decade in civilian life with no, outside governmental forces, preventing me. I still spent another decade finding myself.
Yeah.
And frankly, to this day,
it's a continuous
still
journey.
Finding myself and still feeling good about myself and feeling confident in myself. And, again, this comes back to that, the coming out topic.
Right.
It's, there's not a swinging door on that closet. It's a revolving door.
Yeah.
You're in and you're out, and you're in and you're out, and you're constantly coming out to people in your life. If life were a stage and you could have your entire audience of people in front of you and you could do it once in your life, under a spotlight. Wouldn't that be a beautiful thing?
Yeah.
But it doesn't work that way. Life is linear.
Yeah.
And every time you meet somebody, you come out to them in ways
Yeah.
that you decide.
Right. Yeah, the power of choice, and the power of what we share, what we feel comfortable, our level of vulnerability in that space. And, especially through the course of time, in our own evolutionary experience in life. Because there's things, that you have shared with us that, here it is, you've gone through, there's an era, 11 and before. Then there's another era, 11 to 17. Then there's an era of the Navy. Then there's this era of really just kind of figuring things out. Now, at least this is from my perspective, right? I don't want to project, but this is my perspective based on what I know, is now that there's been these periods of time, now let's really learn who I am and what makes Craig Strang-Thompson who he is. What is going to bring me a sense of freedom, a sense of joy, a sense of happiness, a sense of personal identification, and how can I create that experience for myself, right? And then what I love, like when you were saying, if we had an opportunity to get on stage, to be able to come out and share everything about who we are, would we even really be able to do it in one setting? No, not at all. No. It's like, that's, this podcast is the reason why it's called Reverberations is reverberation is an echo. And that echo is meant to go out and echolocate and identify and connect with those that align with that message, right? So it deeply resonates with them, and then they're able to feel that within, because there's something that you shared with me that's really powerful is that, there's a topic that's never really discussed, right? It's when we are younger and we're going through our sexual exploration. Boys and girls tend to, like with guys, they call it circle jerks, right? Or, you're sharing porn, the guy's on the computer and whatever, there's all these different stories of how guys explore themselves that are natural.
Yeah.
But it's not talked about.
Right.
Right? And then there's guys that experience things with other guys.
Yeah.
And then there's girls that do the same thing. They're over there and they're doing their thing and they're a little bit maybe more expressive with it. A little bit more comfortable, but it's still kept under the wraps, right? For me growing up, it was a very similar trajectory as yours of where, the experimentation was there. And then it's like you said, there's like this on or off switch that you're faced with. It's either a yes or it's a no. It's an on or it's an off. And there's still a period of time. It's like, and I think it's an important thing to discuss of where it's not necessarily a on or off switch or a yes or a no. It's more of like, it's something to really tune in with ourselves. And I love what you said, especially about, I had a fucking lot of practice. And it just wasn't working. It was like this void that was there. And for me, it's like when I had my experiences, there wasn't that level of like, okay, this is where I need to go. This is where my level of attraction is. It was a curiosity. It was something that there was the whole taboo factor, right? Of like, trying to figure some things out, especially, and I think it's even more pronounced, I feel, and I don't know the studies on this, but I would be curious about it. For those of us that have been in traumatic experiences of where we were not receiving the love from our parental units and seeking it outside of ourselves, of that, like you were saying, when you were with the older guys, it's almost as if there was this, when you were speaking, it was like this leaning into like, I just want to be loved. I want to be seen. I want to be felt. I want to be recognized. I want someone to care for me.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, and let me just, allow me to just say that I didn't have a loveless childhood.
Right.
But I had one that was filled with a lot of tragedy and a lot of misfortune and a lot of, abuse. and so the love was there, but it was diluted by all of these other unfortunate emotions and experiences that that made no room for me
Yeah.
to be able to have that moment of self-discovery.
Yeah.
And yeah, sexuality is not an A/B proposition. We know that now. I mean,
Right.
there's a lot of things that I'm still learning about today's perception of sexuality, and we talked about
And
this.
it's ever evolving.
It is evolving, and I admittedly am guilty of not understanding it fully. And what I've been able to embrace is the fact that I'm willing to be open to what that looks like for other people and be as accepting to them as I wanted people to be accepting to me most of my life. And I have been guilty of not being accepting of that and even kind of poking fun at it,
Right.
if I'm being honest.
Yeah.
Only because I don't understand it. And in that revelation, I am able to forgive those before me because now I kind of get it. I understand why maybe you poked fun at me.
Yeah.
And because you didn't
you don't understand
me.
it.
But they also didn't take the time
Right.
to understand. It was easier just to make you miserable
Right.
for being who you are.
And there's
or
still the
learning who you
conformity
are.
too. There's the conformity with the social standards,
The conformity,
expectations.
yeah.
On the flip side of it, and that's it's unfortunate because that's one of the things is bringing these conversations to the table. Because once the conversation is to the table, then in that unwinding, right? Like you said, we don't know what we don't know. And if we're able to bring that conversation to the table to gain some sort of understanding, to deeply listen, to actively listen to where that person is and understand them. Because, and I know I'm going to jump all over the place, but you mentioned, the service to country, right? That oath of the service to country, something bigger and greater than ourselves. Mm-hmm. However, there's something for me that is so deeply embedded in me as this service to humanity, service to creation, that if we can understand one another and understand why, because the same thing, I've done the same thing of poked fun or laughed at jokes. We went to this comedian, went to the show at the Improv. Mind you, the gentleman that identified as male through most of his life, admittedly gay, initially made fun of the pronouns. And then through his own understanding, essentially what you were sharing, right, is through his own leaning into it to gain greater understanding, he now identifies as they. And it's interesting because something that he didn't know, and here he is as a comedian poking fun at himself, essentially, in his own evolutionary journey of understanding it, made it more palpable, made it more relatable, made it more digestible for me, for the rest of the audience that may not quite understand it from a personal level, to be able to relate to that. And now, I like to say that I am receiving where people are at and wanting and craving to understand the human mind and the human pathology and the human journey, though there's so many things that I don't know that are uncomfortable for me at times because I don't know it. It's not that I don't want to know, it's that I'm uncomfortable at making sure that I can relate and that I can understand, so that I am that I'm not insensitive,
Well, look, therein lies the opportunity, for growth. And, let's not forget that we are embracing the fire within. And you've made a lifetime of embracing others, John. So we're not worried about you.
Thank you.
I will take the latitude to speak for your audience and say we're not worried about you. You are an example to others. I will also say that, when I was in the military, which was in the 82 to 88, there were countries, militaries of other countries who had, who were far advanced on these social issues and didn't have these oppressions going on. I remember, European countries who, you could be, gay and married and all these things, where the U.S. was very, they were still stuck in this very old, 20th century mentality. They'd barely gotten over allowing people of color in the military and overcoming a lot of the hurdles that come with that. Now it is a different story. And, talk about being just a pioneer of sorts, pioneering efforts that now make things easier for the youth of today. And so we have an extremely sensitive military construct for active duty and their veterans. And there are programs available that are highly organized and sensitized to these issues. So I just want to make that point that the struggles that I experienced are not the struggles of today, although
Paved the way for it.
there was a paving of sorts. I don't take any of the credit for that.
Right.
We all are pavers in our own way.
Absolutely.
But I'm still living with that construct of the monster that I built. So even at this point in my life where I feel very confident enough to sit here on this, podcast in front of this mic and bare my soul, I'm almost terrified to let you release it. In fact, that there's still a lot of work left to do for me personally. However, the opportunities to do the work now exist, and I've lived and survived long enough to be able to continue doing that work.
Yeah. And that's where the power is, that's really where the power is of when we recognize that, this is a continuous journey, that we are ever evolving. We are ever peeling back the layers of ourself and becoming the truest version of ourself, the most genuine version of ourself, tapping into our genuine truth and what that means. And, we are in a society that has shunned speaking our truth to a degree.
Living your truth.
Living the truth, right? Yeah, living the truth. And you touch on there's so much to unpack here, right? We could literally have a series on this.
On me, yes, I agree. I'm a complex individual.
Well, you're so in that complexity there's a simplicity that is there of you just being you. And that's the beauty of it, is you're a human being carrying out this human experience, which is what people need to tune in with, is that we all have these lives that we shelter parts of ourselves that we don't reveal out of fear, out of insecurity, out of judgment, out of whatever it is that we label upon ourselves. There's things within this podcast that I've shared about myself that I've never shared before.
Yeah.
Yeah. And throughout this entire series, it's been this evolutionary journey of like sharing parts of myself. And in that, people are like, oh, really? I never knew that about you. Oh, really? I never knew that about you. Well, there's important things about that. And that's part of my own journey of self-discovery, my own journey of freedom, of releasing these things that have been attachments that have been holding me back from what I know to be true. And if we are going to create this world that is a more sustainable and harmonious place for all, then we have to get to a space of where we're comfortable with one another to share our truth.
Yeah, it shouldn't require us to, strap on a headset and dive into the matrix and make a choice between a red or blue pill to be happy in this world. Life is not a polarity. And we have been, as a society, we have been placed onto this template of polarity that goes back centuries, that we as a culture are now taking apart piece by piece. We're literally pulling the pieces out of that puzzle and making our own, making our life in our own current and present image. It's not easy. Because it's steeped in tradition and stubborn tradition.
Yeah. And who are we without that identification? Who are we without that construct?
I don't know. I'm still trying to figure that out, John.
Yeah.
I'm still trying to figure out who I am. Every day I wake up wondering, who am I?
That's beautiful. I love that. So I love seeing the smile on your face when you say that. That's the magic. What if we all asked ourselves that question every single day? Who am I? And then after that, we hear that little voice and we go, who am I really? Really? Is that who I am? I live in that space, and yet I'm still challenged by that space of saying, really? Is that who I am? And I like to say that, yes, that's who I am. But then the next day, there's something that reveals a part of myself. It's like, oh, you mentioned something before. It's at the foundation of my work is opportunities for growth. There's no challenges. We have an opportunity to grow. It's a choice. Our life is built upon the choices that we make. Our choices today create the future of tomorrow. And if we can lean into those choices, and if we can tap into the choice that we're making right now and be consciously aware that what I do in this moment is going to not only impact my future, there's going to be a ripple effect that is going to go out, that reverberation. So, like you were saying, terrified about releasing this podcast. I was terrified to start this podcast because what if one person latches onto one thing that I said and embellishes on that and creates this storyline and decides to just make a living hell out of my life? Am I okay with that? Well, I put it out there, right?
Welcome to my world.
Right. And that's why I love having you in my life. And I love the conversations that we have because you are fearless in your expression of what your living incarnation in this human experience has brought you and where you are now. And knowing you for the past 20 years and how our life has evolved and the things that we've learned about each other within the past 72 hours and the growth that we've been able to hold space for with each other is magical.
I just have to say, though, I want to just, manage the expectation here that this is all very new to me.
Yeah.
This version of myself speaking the quiet part out loud to another listening entity that's not myself is new to me. I've had conversations with myself for decades that never quite give me or yield the same sense of discovery and satisfaction that I get from having it with an active listener. And that is something that I've learned to cherish. I wish that I had done that a long time ago. I could have saved myself a lot of anguish, a lot of sadness, and a lot of misdirection if I had just opened up. If it weren't for the very early conditioning that I wasn't deserving of that, And everyone deserves a space in this world. Everyone deserves a voice in this world. Everyone deserves to feel comfortable in their own skin.
Yes.
Whatever that meat suit might look like. Mm-hmm. For as long as you're in it on this planet, you deserve to be happy and not have to worry of the admonishment or the judgment of the ignorant others that might do that to you.
Yeah. That's a mic drop moment is what that is.
It was very spontaneous.
Well, there's been over the past several days, there's been so many mic drop moments of where I'm hardly rendered speechless. And I've just sat there and just stared at you.
He did, really.
It's a true story. Yeah. And, your level of authenticity in this speaking the quiet parts out loud. It's so powerful, so empowering. Just think of the ripple effects that happen by simply voicing our inner truths and getting it out of the entrapment of that mental loop that goes on and on. It's like, my daughter with the hamster, and I had it in my hand, and it's like going from one hand to the next, like it's, going on an intercontinental trip, and yet it hasn't gone anywhere. And it's just like, I'm going. Well, shit, I'm in the same damn place. But what if we just set it over to the side, let it go, and it's in this free world of being able to experience and to explore and what's out there outside of the mental constructs that we have created in our own little mental prison. And now you've got this world, albeit new. I agree, and I don't want to accept that as a reality, because anybody that's listening, your life experience has always been rooted in this quest of something beyond, this quest of freedom, this quest of not accepting the norm, this quest of this giving a voice to something that is within. It's so powerful, and it's so recognizable from my perspective, to be able to witness and to be able to listen to the power of your voice, giving this an expression to come alive. And what a gift it is in the present moment that's going to even be experienced once again before you set foot and get on that plane before you head back. What an opportunity.
Yeah, there is such a thing as appropriate conformity.
Yeah.
And appropriate nonconformity. It's okay to get off the hamster wheel.
Yeah.
It's okay to forge your own path. I probably can't get away with saying this, but I'm going to say it to you anyway. You can edit it out if you like. But when I was an independent, teen working as a dishwasher at a local restaurant, there was an old Italian woman that would come into the restaurant. She came in with a house coat and slippers and a pack of cigarettes and her hair in curlers, and she would stay there all day long. She was retired. She was poor, and she didn't have heat in her little apartment. She had a little gas heater that didn't really work, and so she would spend her whole day at this restaurant in the same booth every day, and she made this place her home and her family, and everybody would, sort of corral around her. Everybody bought her ciggies and bought her food and paid for her coffee, and we all loved her. Her name was Barbara Teresa Bernadine de Rose. She was the most foul-mouthed woman I've ever known in my life, and she was an old school Italian. And when somebody tried to correct her behavior, her conversation, the words she chose, how she lived her life, she would boldly say, and I quote her when I say this, "Fuck them all but 6 and let them be my pallbearers." And that has stuck with me my entire life.
That's a powerful statement.
At the end of your life, if you're lucky enough to have the 6 or 8 people that it takes to carry you to your grave, if you are lucky enough to have a tribe of that many that can carry you on that rite of passage to your final resting place, then you've lived a blessed life.
Yeah. That's a powerful statement. Fuck them all but 6. Those that actually hold the space for you, that actually take the time to be able to see you, to be able to feel you, to be able to navigate the human experience through all the trials, the tribulations, through all the traumatic experiences, through all our follies, to be able to simply be with us, and then to carry us to our final earthly destination.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With all your faults.
Yeah. Those are special people.
Notwithstanding.
Yeah.
And accept you. With all your scars. With all your weaknesses.
That's true acceptance.
Fuck them.
Yeah. Yeah. So we've got to, we don't have to, though in the interest of time for our audience, I'm going to invite you back for a part 2 because we didn't even really get into the next evolution of where this journey is and the reason of being here, right?
No.
We tapped into, we gave the history of the why behind it and what is leading to the sacred yes, right? What is leading to, like we were talking about yesterday, that power of yes,
Yeah.
of saying yes. Or actually, it was before this podcast. We were talking about, are we going to do it? The power of yes. So to bring this episode to a pause, if you will, because it's not to a close, it's to a pause. At this juncture right now, what do you believe that we can do to support a more sustainable and harmonious human experience? What can we do to be better together?
Listen more. I think, that may be a somewhat passé phrase that God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. But I would say listen more and open up your heart and be more accepting and drop these walls of paradigms that that allow you to think you already understand everything and know everything, because we know nothing. We know so very little about the world around us. And so embrace that world around you. And, I often compare life to the Lord of the Rings, where you're constantly taking the ring off and putting the ring back on, and that shift that happens. And it's a bit of the sci-fi geek in me talking. But, be aware that, we are just specks of the universe. Yeah. And the best thing you can do is listen and assimilate and learn and celebrate. Celebrate the faults and the perceived faults in others.
Yeah, that's so powerful, is, the celebration piece. And not only just celebrating the celebratory moments, celebrating the spaces in between, celebrating those faults,
Amen.
Celebrating that. That's a beautiful, beautiful way of where we can lean into one another and truly be better together in those moments of seeing someone and saying, you know what? I see you. I still love you, no matter what. How can I support you in this moment? Instead of being like, oh wow, you're a piece of shit. Oh wow, you fucked up. Oh wow, that's who you are? Let me just alienate you and further push you down in those moments. So thank you for bringing light to that, because celebrations aren't just in those moments of conquest. They're in those moments of when we might need them the most, in our moments of despair, of when we are leaning into somebody and saying, you know what, I'm sharing this with you because I'm kind of crying out for help. I want to be heard. I want to be listened to.
And let me just say that, I would emphasize that, it's not the celebrity on TikTok that deserves that time and attention. It's the awkward teenager. It's the disabled senior citizen. It's the veteran. It's the active duty military person. It's the young, adult at the Burger King drive-thru doing a hustle for a minimum wage. That's where it matters.
Grassroots.
And it's in the simplest of places too. We have this tendency to want to celebrate, these. I'm going to go back to this doppelganger reference, but to celebrate the doppelganger versions of ourselves. Yeah. Those do not exist in reality. That is not a reality. Yeah, look for the reality around you and celebrate, the extraordinary in people.
Craig, I'm going to leave it on that note. Celebrate the extraordinary in people. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for this conversation. Thank you for this opening, because that's what this is. This is an opening to a greater dialogue that I very much look forward to expanding on. And I know our listeners are very curious as to the evolution of what is going to be coming forward in your journey. And so to bring this to a pause, where can our listeners find you? I know at the beginning of the podcast, everyone, there is an ad for Craig's services. So if you are in the need for web-based services, I'll let him kind of talk about that a little bit as well. But where can we find you if people want to reach out to you? Or are you open to that?
My career is in IT, and it started from my early beginnings in the military. So I have a IT-based consulting company based in South Florida. It's easycom.com. That's EASICOMM.com. And when I'm not, performing all of these services as an IT consultant, I'm also, I have the joy of working in music professionally for decades, and that's CraigStrang.com.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that, Craig. And definitely check out his websites. At the conclusion of this, you will hear a song that Craig and I worked on just about 20 years ago. It's a remix of a version that we did, and it is one of my favorite songs to play every single time that Mercury in retrograde comes along, and it will definitely speak to a lot of the things that we have discussed in this podcast. So thank you all so much. It is, once again, Craig, truly an honor to have you here.
Thank you.
And
Thank
just
you.
The beginning.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah. Love you, brother.
Love you too, man.
Love you all. And remember, we are better together. If this podcast resonated with you, or if you feel that there's someone that would, please pass it on. That's what Reverberations is all about, echoing a message that resonates within. And if you or anyone that you are connected with is feeling disconnected from passion, purpose, stuck in a feedback loop of repeating patterns that aren't providing results that are in alignment with what you desire, let's free up some bandwidth, open up the possibilities, and embrace the fire within. Visit Embrace the Fire Within, select a time to connect, and I look forward to our conversation. Have an amazing day. Love you all.
Go to a higher place. Go to a sacred waterfall. Know that everything's about to change. Go to the ocean blue. Listen to Mother Nature call. The universe will never be the same. Go to a higher place. Go to a sacred waterfall. Know that everything's about to change. Go to the ocean blue. Listen to Mother Nature call. The universe will never be the same. Mercury's in retrograde. Everything's about to change. Surrender to your inner grace. Build a stronger temple in its place.